So, how have you been? It's been a while since we've had a chat. I remember our last chat was right after I was crowned.
I know it's been a while. We're on to
Hmm.
even a new Miss Teen Personality
Oh,
Ontario.
wow. 3 years already. It's insane.
It's crazy.
What was your experience being the very first Miss Teen Personality Ontario when there were no expectations and it was just a completely new organization?
It was so surreal of I didn't know what to expect. I don't even think Sophia knew what to expect, but it was just okay, we're doing this, we're trying it. They had like found out a little bit of the familiarity of having the national title holders that they were okay, just growing and expanding. And it's truly been so neat to see over the years, the different ways that the different title holders have come about, and the fact that we're on to
Hmm.
three Miss Teen Personality Ontarios is actually wild to me, because I do remember when it was the very first pageant of this system.
Hmm. And what was your experience competing at nationals? I believe you competed twice, didn't you? Once as a teen and then as a miss.
Yeah, so I competed as a teen. That was my first time ever competing in the personality pageant system. And it was actually my only ever second pageant that I competed in, period.
Oh, wow.
And so I didn't know what to expect. I kind of came into it and I really believed in the personality pageant beliefs. And so that's kind of what drew it to me. And then competing as a teen, I feel like I was maybe a little bit naive about what the experience was even going to entail. But even just showing up authentically got me a fourth runner up, which was kind of the boost I needed to
Hmm.
be okay, I actually kind of know what I'm doing, how um, kind of gauge where I was at in the journey. So then, when by the time I got to compete as Miss, I had so much more experience. I was two titles in, and I was like, okay, I've got this. And the confidence that I saw in myself from the
Hmm.
teen nationals to the Miss nationals was entirely different, of just solely believing so heavily in yourself that you're no matter what happens, we've got this.
How do you think you've grown? Because I know ever since until reaching your Miss Eastern Canada title, there's been a lot of fine tuning because you've been placing higher and higher until you finally won that title. So, what do you think is the difference between you now and you back then?
I think a knowledge of the pageant industry and things like what judges are looking for, connecting with other title holders and even finding similar qualities in yourself, the building of the sisterhood, and then also I think just life experience as you go through it, because we talk a lot about how when we break down misconceptions about the pageant industry, we're talking about how, believe it or not, pageant skills are transferable career skills. But
Hmm.
then I think it's also the other way around, where some of my career skills actually build into my pageant journey. So when I first competed, we were in a pandemic, we were in COVID, I was in college, and I was already learning so many new things about me. And then I transitioned into more leadership roles in my career, and different spaces that I had never been in before. So I was working in camps, which I still am, and then in um, student engagement in the college setting. And so I was getting these new different career opportunities, which were giving me new experiences, that I was getting to public speak. I was interviewing for all of these jobs, and I had just done more things that then when I came back to that second nationals for Miss, I was like, okay, I've done three more actual job interviews that have been successful. I've been doing more public speaking with schools in my platform, and just kind of the things that you get to kind of grow along the way. Platform being a big one as well. My platform is True Faces, and growing the following, the putting it out there, and even just the amount of people who have had back me on it has grown so much. And even bringing the pageant world into that, and finding other title holders with disabilities, the way that the two have just intertwined so well has provided growth opportunities in both areas.
Hmm. And how would you say they intertwine? Because you mentioned transferable skills from pageantry into the real world, so to say. And a lot of people don't realize that there is quite a bit of overlap. Can you talk more about that?
I think the most obvious one is interviews. You get interviewed in pageants, you get interviewed in jobs. I mean, I get interviewed for other things like this and like public speaking opportunities getting interviewed with. But that's like the biggest, like when I'm telling people that they have transferable skills, like that's the one I'm going to. But like more subtly, there is things like confidence, like learning to just present yourself in a way that you are totally like embodied in who you want to be is huge, and seeing the confidence grow for people is one of the like biggest things I ever see. Things like carrying yourself in a room, the energy that you give to other people. When we talk about platform and the things that we're doing in the world, contributing to our communities, whether that's through service, fundraisers, appearances, etc. Like you get to put yourself out there, and you get to take this pageant title and bring it into the community. And I feel like they've just learned so much even about myself from pageants, that then when somebody is like, okay, tell me about yourself in like meeting somebody new, I'm like, I know so strongly like who I am that I just get to like present that.
One thing that I also realized that goes along with your point, that you know so much more about yourself when you compete in a pageant, because when a judge asks you questions, they're all questions about you. So you'd think they're very easy. Come on, I can do this. But then when I was practicing my interview for the very first time when I competed in my first pageant, I was like, oh my goodness, I know all of these things about myself, but I cannot think of it on the spot. It's like when somebody asks you, okay, what's your favorite ice cream? It's like, I don't even remember what an ice cream is anymore. That kind of thing, you know?
Working under pressure, like thinking on your feet, just like such simple things. You're like, okay, I do this so much better now.
And what would you say is something that you've learned like now in your pageant journey that maybe you didn't know during your first pageant?
I didn't know how much it was going to fuel like my inner child, because we think a lot about in pageants, like we're trying to present ourselves very professionally, very like poised. But specifically for the personality pageants system, the like kid in me that it brings out, because I was definitely that kid that loved like princesses. And so my inner child is fully being fulfilled in like my princess dream, and like glamming myself up for things. But then also like just getting to be silly with other people and like the behind the scenes that maybe people don't see as much. But when you look at title holders, like that natural smile that's coming out is because we're thoroughly like enjoying ourselves, and we're okay like being silly and just being who we are. So while on stage, we are keeping our heads up high and putting our hands on our hips and looking all graceful. There's also all of the behind the scenes of just having so much fun and being silly with it. And even when you answer questions, like telling people, I'm like, well, actually my favorite color is sparkles because I can't see colors and they're more visually stimulating. So I'm just like a sparkly human, and like getting to be fun with it and just be a little bit silly, like is something that I didn't think I was going to get from this.
Because I remember in my interviews as well, whenever possible, I always try to make the judges laugh. I don't know why. I've just always done this because I was like, you know what? In normal conversations, when I'm talking to somebody, that's what I try to do. So why would I hold that back and try to be somebody else for the sake of these judges who really they want to see the best parts of you? So that's all of you, not just this little perfect person who's giving these beautiful rehearsed answers. They don't want to see that. They want to see more
You
of
want to
your
be somebody
personality.
like, you want to be relatable to people. And I don't think I noticed like originally how many qualities I had in common with like other delegates and title holders until I was like, oh my God, like you're literally just a person who conveys themselves very well. Like,
And I think that also has a lot to do with confidence because the way you're talking about being able to go on a stage and smile really brightly with your hands on your hips, I think that's a lot about being able to be comfortable with yourself and comfortable with where you are in life, because there's absolutely no way that you'll be able to smile on that stage if you weren't like, here I am, this is who I am, I'm so proud to be here and I'm so proud in everything that I have built so far.
the moment you have like that self-doubt is that moment that like while it's internal, like you start to convey it, whether it's your shoulders are more forward or you start to be kind of closed off to the world. Like if you can just entirely just embody the energy of this is me, and I don't so much care what you think, and I know it's like, oh, I'm trying to impress the judges, but if you truly show up to a pageant for yourself and not for other people, that is when you find title holders.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think people realize that even outside of pageants, you can see it on somebody's face when they have a lot of self doubt held in their hearts. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like you don't want that to become part of you. Sometimes when it's been part of you for so long, it can be difficult to erase it or say, how do I think differently? But I think that's what's good about pageantry because it teaches you to embrace who you are and everything about who you are. Maybe there are things you want to change, maybe you want to grow, and that's amazing. But that doesn't mean you have to demean or put down who you are now in favor of who you want to be 10 years from now.
Exactly. So well said.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk more about True Faces? You mentioned it just before.
Yeah, so True Faces is my pageant platform, but also my disability advocacy organization. So in November of 2018, my sister and I sat down in our bedrooms and decided that we wanted to create an online community for people with disabilities. And so we started with an Instagram page and then grew to kind of all of the social media platforms and even into our community. And to this day, we are now a disability advocacy organization and education, creating a community for individuals with disabilities through social media, because we grew up in a very rural community and didn't have a lot of opportunities to connect with other people with disabilities. And then when we did, we realized how important those experiences and those people and the relatability of those other people was going to be to us, and allowing us to embrace that side of ourselves. So we knew we wanted to bring that to others. And so we created it online, and to this day have featured over 200 people in their stories, and have been spoken on international levels, and have over 40 people who have come through our ambassador program in the last 40 years.
That's
Oh my God,
amazing.
last 3 years, not 40 years. Not that old.
And what gave you this idea to begin True Faces in the first place?
So I actually went to my sister probably about 6 months before we actually started True Faces, and I was like, "Hey, like, can we create an online community for people with disabilities?" And she was like, "No, like, I don't want any part in that, Emilee." And for me, my sister is my best friend, and because she also has a disability, she's also the person I've like always related to the most growing up. And so I was like, "Okay, well, I don't want to do it without her. We just won't do it." And then she came back to me after attending a summer camp for individuals with facial differences, and was like, "This is a really good idea. Like, we need to do this." And so originally that's what it was supposed to be, is specifically for people with facial differences. But we noticed some challenges trying to tap into that community and how it could benefit the entire disability community. So that's when we started branching out to just about everybody, and kind of including them that way, and just really allowing people to have a space where their voice can be heard, and they can kind of find their people, because I knew how important it was for me, and I wanted to give that to other people.
Mm-hmm. And if it's not too sensitive, do you mind sharing what it's like to live with a disability? And what are any stigmas that people have about the disability, like people with disabilities, that you'd like to break, that you want to confront?
Absolutely. It is a wild roller coaster ride. So, anybody who doesn't know me, I am legally blind, which means my vision is 20 over 200. So, you've probably heard of the saying, my vision is 20/20, and that means that it's perfect. So, mine is what you can see at 200 meters or 200 feet away. I have to be 20 meters or 20 feet away. So, it's essentially about 10% of the distance that I can see. And I also have no color vision and light sensitivity, which is why I squint a lot. And I think the biggest misconception that people have is that disability has this negative connotation. One of the things that we do at True Faces is we have advocacy apparel, and on one of our t-shirts, it says True Faces, and underneath it says disability with the disc crossed out. And at first glance, people are like, "Oh, they crossed out the disc because they don't want it to be negative." And that's kind of true, but we cross it out because we want to focus on the abilities. But instead of just removing disc altogether, we still kept it there because there is still a lot of value in the word disability. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's mostly the way that people view that word. And I'm somebody who, July is Disability Pride Month, and I'm embodying that because I am somebody who is very proud to have my disability, and it has allowed me to connect with a community that I would not have otherwise. I currently work at a camp for individuals who are blind and partially sighted, and the people and the community that I have found here has been absolutely wonderful, and I would not want it any other way. So a lot of people think, oh, like, you're blind, you can't drive, that must suck. And I'm like, okay, while I wish I could just get in my car and go somewhere as opposed to like planning out a public transportation route, like, if that's the biggest challenge I face in my life, then so be it. Because honestly, it's not as bad as some people may think. And I'm lucky enough that I feel I can advocate for my community when things are inaccessible or just voicing issues that are being faced in communities. So being able to feel brave enough to say those things and be that kind of person is what kind of drives me forward in being kind of who I am and embodying my disability. And I also find that by sharing my own story to empower others, they feel the power to advocate as well. So it has been like a wild ride. I think if there's something I wanted people to know about vision loss specifically, it's that it's a spectrum and it is always changing. So for somebody who is quote unquote blind, like myself, it doesn't mean that you don't see anything. It can range from being able to see detailed objects close up or shapes or shadows or light. And it kind of varies from person to person. And also that like two people really never see the same thing. I've met people with the quote unquote same condition as me, and they're like, wait, but I can see that and you can't. And I'm like, it's just a wild, wacky world of what people can see. And mine even changes like situationally because of my light sensitivity. If I'm outside on a really bright day, I'm going to be able to see a lot less than if I'm inside with dim lighting. So kind of the way that people experience disability is always going to be different. And I find it's really hard to understand that because people will be like, well, you could see that before, like, why can't you see it now? And I'll be like, well, we changed an environment, or how come you needed help doing this before and you don't now? And I'll be like, because I've done it enough times that I have independence for it. So there's a lot of ways in which it varies and changes. And just understanding that can limit a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions just from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a beautiful message that even though you have a disability, it's not really something that you're ashamed of. I'm so happy to see that you're proud of it. And when you mentioned the whole thing about not everybody sees the same things, immediately in my mind, the what color is the dress thing popped up where nobody could agree on the colors of the dress. And then I looked into it. I was like, hey, what's this all about? And I realized that even between individuals who have quote unquote perfect sight, everybody sees like colors and shapes slightly differently because your eyes are feeding your brain information, and the way your brain understands that is different based on the person. There are even like, I know different like tribes all over the world that see different colors that we don't, simply because they have more words for them. So I don't see any reason why that shouldn't also apply to disabilities, because many people think that, okay, if you're blind, you just cannot see at all, right? And
Exactly.
why do you think that stigma even came about in the first place?
I think a lot of it stems from the medical model of disability, in which the medical condition was the thing that made a person different and the reason that they couldn't access something. And I think that's where the connotation of disability comes from, the idea that like dis is like a negative prefix. And so adding it onto disability, people are thinking like, oh, it's something that they can't do. And the medical model a lot was, oh, they can't do it because of this condition. Versus nowadays, people are shifting more to the societal view of disability, which is the systems and systemic barriers are the things that give a person a disability, not the physical medical condition. It's the way that society has created access issues, discrimination, stereotypes, that sorts of things. And people having those is the reason that people can't access things. It's creating buildings that don't have things like elevators and braille signage or something, than like per se the person actually just having the condition. So I think that's where a lot of it stems from. And that's where a lot of people bring the assumptions from. Assumptions are just about the most dangerous thing a person can do. Even when we're talking about like, there's an astounding number that I don't know off the top of my head of people who have invisible disabilities and just disabilities that you can't see, whether those are like internal mental health, sensory disabilities. Like if I'm not walking around with my cane, how is somebody going to know I'm visually impaired? Well, they're probably not. So they go about their day assuming that I can see. And then when something happens because I didn't see it, they get very frustrated and angry. And they're like, well, why did you do it this way? And I'm like, well, because you assumed that I could see, we're now in this like little argument, which happens more than not. But just people having these assumptions about what it's supposed to be, how people are supposed to be treated, kind of stemming from that older medical model, is really like what tends to hold people back when thinking about disability versus thinking about it as society being the issue and people's beliefs or the systemic issues that we've basically implemented over time being the reason that disability even exists. And I think it's neat that you mentioned like how different tribes have different colors and see different things that way, because I was talking to another title holder recently who's part of the Indigenous community and mentioning that some Indigenous cultures don't even have a word for disability. Like the word disability just simply does not exist because they've made it so that everybody is just as they are, come as you are. We will make sure that you have access to the things you need. And I thought that was such a neat concept because it really does show that like social model of disability of like disability only exists because people put barriers in place that allowed people to not access things.
Mm-hmm. And that's so interesting that you've mentioned that people don't really realize that you have a disability if you're not walking with your cane. And it made me wonder, how do you integrate people into society properly so that there's no stigma against disabled people, but at the same time they have all of the same opportunities that anybody else does? Because if you don't see the disability right away, then first of all, you won't be able to accommodate for that person. But also, if you don't see the person with the disability right away, you treat them like everybody else. So if you were prime minister, what would you change to make sure that everybody who had a disability was treated equally?
So I think this is such an interesting concept because Canada has I'm not great on law and logistics, but the bill that says by 2025 or whatever, I think has been pushed now, needs to be like set to these certain accessibility standards. And even the accessibility standards that they have set are like the most basic of the basic. Like your building needs to have ramps, elevators, and they think a lot about how people physically access space and breaking down those physical barriers. But something I've learned while interacting with the disability community is that every single person is different. And it doesn't even go for the disability community. A lot of the analogies I talk about when like teaching kids about advocacy is like just using generic, like, okay, how do you tie your shoes? Like, how do you brush your teeth? Do you start at the top left corner, top right corner? Do you do front, back, front, back, center? Like, how do people do things differently in their day-to-day lives? And taking that concept to disability in that everybody's needs are going to be different. Like I said, vision loss is a spectrum, and every person that I've met, like people see the same thing as I do, and they'll be like, no, I like prefer to write my notes on paper and then have like an app like transfer it to electronic notes versus just typing it. And everybody loves to do everything differently. So the idea of having like a completely accessible world, if you think about it from like accommodations perspective, is simply never going to happen. You're never going to think of everything beforehand before a person comes into a space or an environment where they're going to feel entirely accommodated unless you ask them. And a lot of the times, like accommodations are afterthoughts. We want to be thinking about accessibility beforehand. What can we do to make spaces more comfortable for people instead of like, oh, I'm just going to change this one thing because Emilee needs it. A great example of this is the curb dips on like sidewalks, and people think like, great, it's great for a wheelchair to go down, but it's also great for carts if you have groceries, baby strollers. anything like that, and how it applies to the outside world. So having accommodations are going to, you think about them in the way that they're just helpful for like one group of people, and then they end up being helpful for a lot more of the population than ever expected. And so while those things are great, like thinking about them, it's so hard to accommodate for everybody. So sometimes it's as simple as just asking beforehand, having ways that people can provide feedback. Something that my college did before events is they had a registration form, and at the bottom of the registration form, it was like, is there anything we can do to make this event more accessible to you? And it was a space where they could just be like, hey, I need an ASL interpreter. I need lower lighting. I need somebody to meet me at the door and guide me to my seat. And it was spaces where they could give that information, and they had it, and they were prepared at the moment to implement that accommodation, if you will. So for example, if I was like, I need somebody to guide me at the door, versus showing up to that event and just being like, hey, I need somebody to take my seat, it was already like thought of, planned, and then implemented. So having ways that people can voice that stuff beforehand, and also have that generalized like accessibility features knowledge, and even thinking about it in a more broad term than just physical disabilities. I had somebody recently in the disability community tell me about a time they went to the store, and because of their mental illness, they had a panic attack in the store, and the way that they were treated and handled in that scenario was not ideal. So even just increasing that awareness of like how to handle different situations in the community, and expanding things like AODA training, so accessible Ontario Disabilities Act. I don't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head, but expanding things like those and making them not just mandatory, but having additional opportunities for training is something that is so little but goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
That was a long-winded answer of your question.
No, no, don't worry. I want your answers. It's really enlightening to hear about how, what was it, your college, that they gave you the forms and they're like, tell us about how we can make this more accessible to you. I think that's really wonderful, because the way you mentioned it about how you will never be able to know what everybody needs, right? And you'll never be able to accommodate for 100% of the people. I think having a form like that is a great way to accommodate, at least for most people, right? And maybe even slowly erase the stigma bit by bit when people are willing to talk about, okay, so this is what I need if I'm going to attend XYZ event, sort of thing. Because I'm not sure what it's like, but are there people who are maybe embarrassed to fill out forms like that because of their disability, and sort of they don't want that attention on them?
Exactly. One of the things that pageants have done is made me even more comfortable in talking about my disability and advocacy journey. Even though I was before, it's given me a bigger platform to talk about that on. And I acknowledge that that's not the reality for most people. Most people are either still in a journey of acceptance of their disability, or have a lot of fear around the judgment of what other people will think of. And I think there's two sides to the same coin here of, yes, people will have maybe that fear when disclosing on a forum of like, oh, this is something I'm going to need. But on the other hand, would it be better to disclose it beforehand and have them prepared, and it can be a little bit more discreet, versus you walk in at the moment, they had no idea somebody who was blind is coming to the event, and they're showing a movie and they don't know how to put descriptive video on. And now everybody knows that they have to put descriptive video on. And now it's this whole like center of attention thing, versus it just having been there from the beginning, and people were like, okay, cool, like this could be for anybody who's sitting in the room. So sometimes it's even changing a little bit of the way of how we as people with disabilities are thinking about like what we need. And you don't even have to sometimes disclose your disability for those sorts of things. If you're just like, I need captions on a video, on a like movie. I know lots of sighted people who cannot watch a movie without captions being on, or like hearing people, because I'm like, because they like, I just need it to be able to like understand the movie, which is so weird to me. But understanding that it helps a lot more people, and it can be a lot more discreet that way, but it's coming from both sides and the acceptance. And I think even by just having that question on your form means that you're thinking about people with disabilities and how they're accessing your events and spaces. So for me, knowing that that was even thought of means that they care enough to not judge me.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And how would you recommend somebody who maybe has a disability and doesn't accept themselves? How would you recommend they go on that journey to being able to be comfortable with who they are and not be ashamed of their disability?
It's something that everybody does on their own time. I went through it where I was coming into adulthood and I was moving out on my own. And I realized that I got through the first like 15 years of my life just holding on to my parents' arms as we went around town. And they're always helping me reading signs. And I never had to ask like cashiers and stuff for help at stores. And then when I realized that I needed to start being independent, having to take public transit, ask for help in stores because there wasn't anybody with me, using a cane to get around. There was a lot of things that I had to start doing that made me really uncomfortable. I was like, I hate talking to strangers. I hate asking for help. It's not one of my favorite things. I don't like using my cane because I think it draws more attention to me. And I think for me, what helped with the acceptance of that was, I don't want to like say toxic positivity here, but like thinking of the things that were good that came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I use my cane, my parents don't have to come to the mall with me and my friends, which is much less embarrassing than my mom walking around with me while my friends and I talk about boys. Or, you know, if I ask for help in a store, then I don't have to feel as anxious about not being able to read a tag or something. When I use my cane, something that helped for acceptance was making it my own. A lot of people think, oh, like I just need to use this mobility aid and this is how it came and that's it, that's all. I added a pink strip to my cane. It was hot pink. It was very out there, but I'm somebody who's a little bit more out there, and I loved that it was a different color than just red. I also now have one that's gold and sparkly. I've added little keychains on them, and when it gets to be a part of you, I found I was more proud to use it. You know, if people were looking at me because my cane was gold and sparkly, then like, so be it. And this is where even like, I mean, I don't want to say just join a pageant because it'll make all your problems go away, but I got to learn how to walk confidently and use my cane on stage. And I took all of that confidence into my regular life and used it so that when I walk down the street with my cane, I act like I am on the runway. And I'm like, I want you to think nothing but, wow, she's confident. Wow, she looks so good walking down that sidewalk, rather than, look, she's walking with a cane. Like,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just embodying that energy, and it's something that everybody's going to do at their own pace. But if you want any more tips and tricks, let me know.
That's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear that you're like making it part of yourself. So it feels like this is an extension of you, not something that you need, not something that's being forced on you. That's really beautiful. I think that's an amazing tip for anybody who's disabled who may be watching this, who wants to feel like this is who they are and
Yeah.
wants to accept themselves. I know, I just think that's such an innovative idea. I never thought of that. And I remember, I forgot which pageant it was. I think it was Miss America. One of the contestants, she was in a wheelchair the entire time because she couldn't walk. But I was just looking at the videos of her performing, and all I could think is, wow, that confidence, that was amazing. I forgot which state she was representing, but if I find that out, I'll add it to this description of the video. But yeah, and I just think that should never stop you from pursuing what you want in life because, like you said, the world is your runway. So you can just walk down the
Yes.
street with your cane and you can pretend like you're
Hit
the
those
best thing out
sidewalks.
there. And I think it's amazing to develop that confidence, especially beginning when you're young, so that you never feel like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do now? I have to carry this cane around because I don't have somebody who can walk with me. And yeah, I think that's just such a beautiful message to share.
Yeah.
And I know you were recently on, is it Fashion Dis? Could
Yes.
you tell me more about that?
Okay. So I finished my early childhood education and I did my 2 years of college. And last year, coming out of COVID, I knew I wanted to be back home close to my family. And so I started, like, I was doing a bit of virtual work. I was supplying a little bit as an ECE. But I knew that I wanted to do something just solely for myself and for the purpose of my own enjoyment. So I actually did two TV shows that I filmed in the winter. One was called Mind Your Own Business, which was a feature for True Faces. And that was like, I was like, great, get a little bit more publicity, get to put my message out there. I was like, that's awesome. But Fashion Disc is the one that I did solely for myself and simply because I wanted to. And so basically, they gave me a head to toe accessible makeover and photo shoot with a photo reveal. And I have to say, it was truly one of the most amazing experiences I have ever had. The crew was so great with thinking everything through. They shared accessible makeup tips, accessible like fashion companies that have like braille on them, and even when they did the photo shoot, like telling me where to look, what exactly I needed to do with like facial muscles instead of just them like sitting behind the camera and being like, do this. Like this doesn't mean anything. So the way they were like tighten your cheek muscles or like move your lips like apart a little bit. Everything that they thought of was thought through right to my needs, down even down to the photo reveal where they brought my mom in, because my mom has been the
That's so
person
sweet.
who like describes things to me my entire life. So the way that she describes things and talks about things have a lot of value and meaning to me, and they hold a lot of weight. So when they did my photo reveal, they brought out a tablet that I could look at, and then they brought my mom as well to talk about like her seeing it on the big screen and what it like felt and meant to her. And so they really like thought of everything. I even got to keep some of the stuff so that I can continue to use my accessible makeup features. And it was just a lot of fun, even to meet the different people in the industry with disabilities, because I feel like there hasn't been a lot of representation in the media from people who have disabilities, but even specifically are blind. And so seeing other people and being the first person on their show to be blind, they were like, even asking me questions, and they were like, okay, so I work specifically with people in wheelchairs, but like, does this work for somebody who's blind? Is this helpful? Thinking of things like and how they were transferable. So somebody with lower mobility can't clasp a necklace or bracelet with the like small typical clasp. So they have magnetic ones. And I was like, well, I can't see it, so it's hard for me. And so they like showed me things like that, and finding out just even between different professionalisms, like what kind of worked, and seeing both sides of it was just all around really, really cool.
That sounds amazing. I never even thought of the magnetic clasp thing before because,
Right?
yeah, these I'm so amazed whenever I think of C solutions that somebody else thought of that. I'm like, oh my goodness, that is so innovative
So
because
innovative.
I never even thought of accessible makeup. It's just something I've sort of just used, and I was like, oh, this, I'm sure everybody can use this, but I didn't
Yeah.
realize how much thought and effort goes into that because now that I think about it, how would you tell the different shades of eyeshadow from each other if you didn't have something, some way to help you, right?
It's as simple as like, is my blush blended enough, like on my face? And one of the things was like using your hands for a lot of things, or a shorter wand with mascara to get better control. And like doing lipstick even with like your finger or something too. Like just the like placement of everything, and even having somebody to teach you, because my mom isn't somebody who knows a lot of makeup. I'm not calling you out, mom, but like, you know where you stand on this topic. So when it was like, okay, well, this is something I want to learn, it's really hard to go watch a YouTube video and be like, okay, I understand how to do makeup now, or like follow along,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of them aren't catered to like, well, I can't see what you're doing. So like, how does that work? So even just having somebody to one-on-one teach you, like, this is where you place the dots, this is how you're going to rub it in, this is the extra accessibility tools, but just even like, this is how you do it, was like very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how far you've come, not just through pageantry, but through your own experiences with fashion days and true faces and such. And I just wanted to ask you, is there anything about your pageant journey that you would change going back now?
I cannot think of a single thing that I would want to change about this journey. From the people I've met to the person I've become, both within pageantry and out of pageantry, and just being excited about where it's going to go even farther. I'm excited to crown some new title holders in August in Calgary, and then seeing if competing is something else I'm going to do. I'm just very excited to see where it's going to go, and I simply would not change a single thing.
And do you have any advice for pageant contestants who will be competing at nationals or maybe even at pageants later on?
I think it comes down to something that I've said a million times while we've been on here is simply being yourself and embodying the energy that this is who I am, this is who I want to be, and this is how I'm showing up. And finding something that is truly so unique about yourself. Everybody thinks that in a pageant, like a beauty pageant, that you need to like fit into this mold, be that like 5'7", like fit model, like and being this like one type of person. And the thing about that is, I think that is the most boring thing in the world. I think there's nothing more boring than seeing like 20 people who are the exact same and say the exact same answer on stage, and you're like, wow, that was like really well said, but also like that was boring. So I think finding something that's going to make you stand out and really be unique, and you're like, I am like an 80-year-old woman and I love crocheting blankets for children or something like that. Like, just find something that you're like, I have never heard of that before. And so for me, that's been like disability and my experiences, because they're very unique to me. And even within the pageant industry, like knowing how many people with like who are visually impaired who have competed in pageants is like, I can count them on my one hand. So knowing that that is a very unique experience that I can present to people, and I can make it relatable, even though somebody has never had vision loss. They're like, maybe they've known somebody, or maybe I'm like, I don't know if you've ever struggled to know which sock goes on which foot if you get dressed in the dark in the morning. Well, that's every day for me. And like finding ways that it's both relatable to people, but also very unique to you, just continues to like be that like embody yourself and who you want to be.
I love your message about authenticity because in pageants, especially, there are so many people who try to be like last year's title holder. They're like, okay, this is what the pageant is used
This
to
is what they
crowning, so
want.
I'm going to become exactly this and I'm going to fit that mold. But really, that's not what they want. They want you to be who you are and just enjoy the entire process, because you're not doing anybody any help by being last year's title holder, because you'll only
Exactly.
ever be a second rate version of somebody else, but you can be a first rate version of yourself. So why not try that out?
That was so well said. Like, put that on a pillow somewhere.
And do you have any closing thoughts before we end the interview?
Not so much, but thank you for having me and starting this conversation. I think they're so important, both for people competing in pageants, people who are interested in pageants, or even people who are just interested in getting to know title holders. So I think this is super cool that you're doing this and just talking with people.
And thank you for telling me so much I didn't know about the disability space and true faces. This was so enlightening to hear.
Anytime.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much, Emilee. Bye.
Thanks, Sasha. Bye.